And although she's the last speaker, she is not the least speaker, okay? She is a graduate of Buckeye Central and a native of Crawford County. Kimberly Groth and her family have lived in Bloom Township, Seneca County for the past 12 years. Their home is located in the footprint of not one, but two proposed wind projects. sPower's Seneca Wind project and Apex's Honey Creek Wind project. Tonight, Kimberly is going to provide information on what we know about the Honey Creek project and what we need to do to say this project is just not a good fit for our community. Let's welcome Kimberly.
Well, thank you for having me here tonight. I know that we've had some really great presentations already, and so I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as I can. As was said, I am a native of Crawford County. I grew up in Chatfield, but I've lived in Seneca County for a while. And as was said, my home, luckily neither one of these projects has come to fruition, but it is in the footprint of two different proposed projects. So the blue star up there would represent where I live. To the left, you see sort of some pea green shaded areas. That is land that was leased to the Seneca Wind project. And then to the right, you see some parcels that are shaded more in yellow. Those are parcels that are leased to the Honey Creek Wind project, which is what also extends down here and covers the northern half of Crawford County. Now, last fall, Apex stated that they were going to slightly shrink the size of Honey Creek and take out all of the portions in Seneca County, which was a huge relief to my family. But that map shows you why I am here tonight and why I've been involved in these fights. So I got a quote on the next screen here. And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. Anybody know who that quote is from? I heard a couple say Paul Harvey, yes. So Paul Harvey's got another quote that he's pretty famous for. What's that? Yes, thank you, the rest of the story. So I feel like this plays well from what our earlier speakers have said. But when I found out my home was gonna be, possibly, in the footprint of a wind project, I started reading and I realized really quickly, there's more to this story than what the developers are telling us. And I think that's, my message, piggybacking on the earlier messages. Really, when you hear the developer tell you something, ask yourself, what's the rest of this story? And I'm gonna move through this super fast because I know it's late, but for example, when they talk about impact on property value, developers like to cite a study from the Berkeley National Laboratory, 2013. If you actually dig into the numbers from that study, more than 97% of the sales they used were over a mile away from any turbine. We've got some perspective here already, but Seneca Wind wanted to put 19 turbines within 2 miles of my home. So when I looked at those numbers, that study wasn't quite so reassuring anymore. And we've heard a lot about setbacks. How close, Carrie, did you say that turbine was to your home in that last picture?
2,100 feet.
2,100 feet, okay. Here in Ohio, our setback that the state sets is 1,125 feet from a non-participating property line. And that's measured from the tip of the blade when it's out at a right angle. But what you see then at the top of the screen are some safety setbacks as recommended by the turbine's manufacturer. And the one that really stands out to me there is that during a thunderstorm, the manufacturer suggests that you leave the wind farm and wait over 3,200 feet away. And again, Ohio's current setback is just over 1,100 feet. And again, I'm going to move through this really quick. I know it's kind of late, but when you hear developers talk about the massive amount of subsidies that have gone to fossil fuels, the way I like to look at that instead is what is the subsidy amount per unit of energy generated? Because when you look at it from that perspective, all of a sudden renewables look a whole lot more expensive. The super tall line there is actually solar, but wind, which I kind of have labeled, is much greater when you look at it this way than, for example, coal or hydrocarbons, which you can barely see, the two columns over there to the left. And talking about numbers, I have this in here. This is from the Seneca Wind project, that other project in my home. And Seneca Wind had somewhere around 90 turbine locations that they had. The total number of leaseholders who stood to potentially host a turbine in that project was 57. Most of those were on non-owner occupied parcels, so absentee landlords. The number of leaseholders who stood to host a turbine on an owner-occupied parcel was only 16. And then the bottom number that you have there is the total number of residences that were going to be impacted by the project. And that's according to the developer's acoustic assessment, their noise study. And that number was over 2,700. So just to give some perspective on how a relatively small number of people who do stand to benefit from this, but they impact so many more people throughout the whole community. And I want to throw this out, it's not on the screen, but Apex was recently quoted in the Telegraph Forum, and they said that they have 319 leases signed for the Honey Creek Wind project. But that number is deceiving because, for example, 10 of those leases are linked to one individual, for example. And in that case, the individual doesn't even live in Crawford County. I'm not here to call out any leaseholders, but I think it's important when you hear these numbers put out by the developer that you understand they can be presented in a way that's a little bit misleading, or a lot misleading. And here in Crawford County, about a month ago, there was some drama. We're here in Crawford County. I'm going to guess everybody's aware of that. Don't need to discuss it. But Honey Creek Wind put this statement out on their Facebook page last month, shortly after this happened. They're talking about that they value integrity and professionalism. They want to build trust. And we've kind of already heard this tonight, so I'm just kind of going to continue a theme. We are not the first community to face this. And I think as Crawford County thinks about what future you want for yourselves, it only makes sense to look at some of the other communities that have gone through this and what they have experienced. So just last month, up in Michigan, Montcalm County, now Norm, is that what you said?
I watched the video, it's great.
Yeah. So Mr. Maine up there just last month, he says, I just don't trust them. And he's talking specifically about Apex. And he's got good reason. His family is one of 3 there in Montcalm County who had to send a cease and desist letter to Apex because Apex had a land agent who was telling their neighbors that these 3 families had already leased all of their land. And so you might as well sign up too. These guys are already participating. Only trouble was those 3 families had not signed up for anything. And so they had to go the cease and desist route to get Apex to quit using their name to try to convince their neighbors to sign up. There are many examples of public comments, particularly with the Ohio Power Siting Board, which is the state siting body here in Ohio, where Apex just blasts their comment section with form letters from people, and many times people don't even realize a letter has been sent in their name. The most extreme example of that that I'm aware of is a resident in Seneca County. Her name is Kathy Scheidler. And she did actually submit a comment to the Ohio Power Siting Board. She followed a link from a Facebook page that Apex put up, similar to what you see there. And she expressed her concern with the project, particularly the lack of studies on health for both humans and livestock. And a little while later, a comment did show up on the Siting Board's comment page with her name, but amazingly, her entire original submitted letter, including, and these are her words, all of my questions and concerns on the project were stunningly replaced with statements that I did not write and absolutely refute. It became abundantly clear I was the victim of falsification of documentation by Apex Republic Wind. And that's not the only incident. This is a headline from the New York Times about a project in New York. And this is Apex again. In that wind project, it was realized that Apex had evidence of a bald eagle nest that they just decided to completely leave out of the application when they filed with the state. And when it was discovered, I don't know if you can read it, but the little circle part there says that one judge reviewing the application said that the episode raised, quote, serious questions about the applicant's character and fitness. And the next slide, this occurred up in Isabella County in Michigan also. And the Isabella project, Apex has identified that as a project that they say would be comparable to what they would like to do here in Crawford County with Honey Creek. One of the things that they did there, which we also saw in Seneca County, is that they brought in union employees to testify and to speak in favor of the project and the jobs that it would create. And they did that also in Isabella. The problem is that then when they went to construct the project, they did not use those union workers who they had speak in their favor. And so that resulted in them picketing in the cold weather there in Isabella, Michigan. And one last example, this is not Apex. This is the other project that was in Seneca County. sPower was the developer. Seneca Wind actually sued over 30 of their own leaseholders in Seneca County Common Pleas Court, attempting to force them to stay in leases that had already expired. Now, you've heard me talk a couple times about the Ohio Power Siting Board. Back when Seneca County, when Seneca Wind, when I found out about that, and when our neighbors in Huron and Erie County found out about Emerson Creek, when Republic Wind started in northern Seneca, at that time, we did not have any avenue, any process for local control here in Ohio. Everything went straight to the Ohio Power Siting Board. It is a board made up of 7 appointed members. None of them are elected, they're all appointed. And even today, now that we do have a little bit of local control, which I'll get to, ultimately, all projects have to be approved by the Siting Board here in Ohio. Their process, this is their process flow chart. As it suggests, it's long, it's complicated, and if you want to participate effectively in it, you really have to have legal counsel and expert witnesses that you can pay for, so it's also quite expensive. And again, Apex was quoted recently, just earlier this month, I think, in the Telegraph Forum. And in that article, they referenced rigorous state processes. And I'm going to assume they were referring to this process. But an important detail, what's missing perhaps from the Siting Board process, is that the Ohio Power Siting Board does not have its own researchers. So when a project has a sound study done, the Ohio Power Siting Board doesn't have their own experts going out to get data for that sound study. They are going to take the data that is provided to them by the developer. And unless local residents or another local party gets involved to provide their own set of data, that is all that the Ohio Power Siting Board is going to look at. And I think it's kind of like the fox guarding the henhouse theme, or you know, my husband said when we were talking about this, it's like the used car salesman. He holds up this long, stapled pack of papers, and he says, look at all the tests we ran on this car. There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing's going to go wrong. But again, the rest of the story. I'm going to keep moving quickly through this, but I want to point out a couple of things that we saw in the Siting Board process in the Republic Wind case up in Seneca County. This is a map of the sound monitoring locations that Apex reported for that project. If you can see up there, the top 2 little triangles aren't even in the footprint of the project, but they use that data. So what they did, they took those, I think it's 7 locations, recorded some sounds there, and came up with what they determined was a nighttime average, ranged from 32 on the low end to 51 at the high, and they came up with what they said is an average of 41. And the Ohio Power Siting Board typically allows the developer here in Ohio to add 5 decibels to that. So for the Republic Wind project, you add 5 to the 41 and you get 46. And so in the Republic Wind project, that was what Apex was requesting as the allowable sound level. But, and Norm, I think it was you who kind of took this from me, that doesn't mean that they couldn't go above that, because the little LEQ, those letters that follow the DBA, can be very, very important when you're talking about sound. This is LEQ, which is equivalent continuous sound level. And so that number is a 1-hour average. So they could still go over the 46 as long as the average over the course of an hour is under 46. So again, when you hear a developer and they're giving you these numbers, you know, it really is important to know there might be more to this story to put it in a better context to make sure you understand it. And in the case of Republic Wind, there's even more to the story. So I showed you the map back here of the sound locations that Apex reported the data from. Well, there was a very astute local resident at the adjudicatory hearing for this case, and she said, I think they have more data than that. I know I saw that company out in the western footprint of the project. And so during the adjudicatory hearing, and after quite a bit of forcefully leading them there, Apex's expert finally revealed, yes, we did have 3 additional locations that we had sound data from in the western part of the project. You see the red buses on there. And so the adjudicatory, the judge in the siting board, said then, okay, well, show us your data from those 3 that you left out. And wouldn't you know it, all 3 of them had sound levels lower than the reported average from the ones that Apex did choose to include. All right. Nobody has to volunteer to raise their hand, but anybody planning to go home and sleep in the doghouse tonight? Well, in Seneca County, it seems that Apex thinks that, at least in the Republic Wind area, most of the folks do sleep in, if not a doghouse, at least something very comparable. Because buried in their shadow flicker study is this little tidbit. A receptor in this greenhouse model is defined as a 1 square meter area located 1 meter above ground. Actual house dimensions are not taken into consideration. So 1 meter is a little over 3 feet. So, you know, a little over 3 feet by a little over 3 feet tall. I thought, well, that's, you know, about doghouse size. So in Ohio, the siting board does want the developer to stay to 30 hours or less, but they're measuring that, assuming that your house is 1 cubic, is that what you would call it, the math teacher? 1 cubic meter in size. So not only are our houses not actually that size, we own the entire parcels of our land. You know, my husband and I have 7 acres and we use all of that. So how much shadow is our entire property going to receive? Not just that 1 square meter by 1 square meter high. And the 30 hours, by the way, the developer can go beyond that. In the Republic Wind project, the developer said there would be 46 non-participating homes exposed to more than 30 hours. The most was a house that was going to get about 75 and a half hours of shadow flicker per year. But with the siting board, as long as the developer says that they're going to provide some mitigation methods, which typically is blinds for your house, maybe planting some trees, I guess that's okay. The siting board has allowed it. And I'm going to move real quickly here through a couple of pictures that have to do with karst. So karst is porous rock, promotes water flow underground, sinkholes and caverns. Here in Crawford County, you have some around lichens. Got the road closed sign. It's not the only place it is here in Crawford, but I put the lichens picture up because do any of you remember when the road was closed for like over a year? State Route 19? Yeah, it interrupted my drive to work for that entire year, so I remember it well. I asked the Ohio Department of Transportation if they had any records related to that road closure, and they did. And lo and behold, in what they sent me was the word karst came up a lot, including this particular quote. The area is part of a karstic subsurface drainage system that covers a much larger area. Now, why do I bring that up? And that's because when you locate industrial wind turbine farms, which require these huge foundations, there's really a lot of disruption to the karst. And that can be problematic to area wells and to the area water table. When Apex was asked about this in the Telegraph forum recently, again, they talked about these rigorous state processes. So part of the quote from the Apex employee in the Telegraph forum, he said, we have to work through such rigorous processes with the state of Ohio and different agencies within the state to ensure that we're not disrupting anything like that. We would not be allowed to cite a project if there was a public health risk. There's no risk to water tables. It's just not an issue. Well, in the Republic Wind project, the Ohio Power Siting Board disagreed. That case is the first and only time in the state of Ohio that the siting board decided to deny a certificate for a wind project. And one of the main things that they cited in that decision was karst. This quote comes directly from the siting board's opinion, in which they denied that. They said that evidence suggests disruptions in the karst has the potential to quickly and detrimentally affect those wells. So, Apex says we have these rigorous state processes to protect the local people, and here's the siting board saying, yep, we got a potential risk here, so we're going to deny the certificate. And so Apex gracefully bowed out of Seneca County and said, boy, we're glad we didn't mess up those people's water. No. They strongly disagreed with the Ohio Power Siting Board. The project manager was quoted actually suggesting that the siting board had some kind of backroom deals to come up with their denial. They requested a rehearing on the decision. That rehearing was denied. The siting board stood behind their decision. And Apex has, I think, about another month to decide if they want to appeal that decision to the Ohio Supreme Court. So the folks up in Republic are waiting to see if they decide to do that. But I want to move into now Senate Bill 52. This is fairly new. I said that the other counties, when they had these developments come, didn't have any options for local control. Here in Crawford County, you do. Senate Bill 52 was passed last summer, went into effect in October. There are multiple parts to this law. I'm really only going to talk about one of those tonight, and that is the creation of restricted areas. So Senate Bill 52 gives your county commissioners the ability to designate part or all of the unincorporated areas of the county as a restricted area. And that would prohibit the construction, it can be of either wind or solar or both. And I want to make clear, Senate Bill 52 is not about completely eliminating renewable energy from Crawford County. It is about, if this community doesn't think these large industrial developments are a good fit, protecting the community from those type of developments. So even if a restricted area is created here in Crawford County, if somebody wants to put a little turbine by their house, they could still do that. If a school wants to put a couple turbines up like what Winford has, they could still do that. If you have a manufacturer who wants to locate in your community and put some turbines next to their factory, they could still do that. It would only be prohibiting the really large industrial projects that cover tens of thousands of acres. Similar idea with solar. If your commissioners were to declare a solar restricted area, it would still let people put a solar array on their own roof or in their own yard. Or if you had, again, a school or a business who wanted to put a solar array on their roof, that would still be allowed. It would only prohibit, again, the large solar facilities that can cover, in the case of solar, thousands of acres. And as Lynn was just saying, the commissioners here in Crawford County have started that process. And so there's that meeting, same building here, next week on Thursday. It is my understanding that the Crawford County commissioners at this time are considering a restriction on wind only. It could include solar. I don't believe the Crawford County commissioners are considering that at this time. So, as your community thinks about whether a restricted area would be a good fit, some things that I think you should think about. Do you want to use a restricted area to protect your county parks, nature preserves, schools, if you have historic sites? Do you want to use a restricted area to protect the airspace around your airport? Or if you have any private landing strips here in Crawford County? But the bigger question, I think, is do you think covering half of your county in a large industrial wind project is going to be good for Crawford County's long-term goals? So I took this page from the Crawford 2030 vision, which is the community's own identified goals for itself. And among what you see on here, it says Crawford County wants to attract young families, wants to create a safe and healthy environment, and wants to slow and reverse the rate of population decline. I'm going to state, I don't think covering half your county in an industrial wind farm is going to help you achieve those goals. Now, one of the things that you're going to hear developers mention a lot is that this is going to bring in tax revenue, and particularly for the schools. And if you dare to oppose this, well, then you're obviously against education. No, it's not quite that simple. But, you know, when you look here in Crawford County, and I am a Buckeye Central graduate, still live in Buckeye Central School District, in fact. What you see on the screen here was in their quarterly newsletter that came in my mailbox last fall. It had pictures of the beautiful new facilities that they have out there at Buckeye Central. And it stated, right next to those pictures, that they would be completely paid for in a few months' time. Now that's been more than a few months ago, so I'm guessing that they are paid for by now. And meanwhile, there in New Washington, you have St. Bernard's School. For the first time this year, it was closed, low enrollment, and I'm a St. Bernard's graduate too. St. Bernard's 8th grade and then Buckeye Central. So this one's rough for me. But you know, the question is, yes, this would bring money and some of it would go to our schools. But what is the more pressing need for our schools right now? I'm going to say, at least in the Buckeye Central District, I think they need students more than they need money. And again, covering the district in a wind farm is not going to help with that. Now, this picture comes from the webpage for the Community Foundation for Crawford County. They have something that they call a Come Home Scholarship. So the idea is that after you graduate, if you come back and live here in Crawford County for a certain amount of time, then you get the scholarship to help pay off those student loans. And I think it's, I think that Norm and Kevin might appreciate this, because if you go to the Community Foundation's website, it says that this idea comes from Huron County, Michigan. And, you know, as we just learned, Huron County, Michigan had the earliest wind development in Michigan and the most wind development in Michigan. So is it a coincidence that they are coming up with creative ways to get youth to come back to Huron County? I don't think so. And I think here in Crawford County, if we have to try to convince our youth to come back and live under 650-foot tall wind turbines, we'd probably have to offer some enticements for that too. I'm going to close, and I'm going to cross my fingers that the sound works on this next screen. It is, if it works, a video of State Representative Craig Riedel, and it was taken back in February of 2021 when he was testifying in the State House on behalf of a bill he had co-sponsored, and it was a sister bill to Senate Bill 52. And as you listen to this, keep in mind Representative Riedel, he's actually a Seneca East graduate, and his wife is from here in Crawford County, but they now live in Defiance. And the district he represents includes Paulding and Van Wert counties, which here in Ohio host the most wind development in the state. And I think the way he words this is better than I could.
Again, I'm going to go back to me living this. You know, I live in that district where most of the wind development has occurred in Ohio. This again is more of a quality of life issue. So those folks back there, they know, they understand the numbers. They get it. They can add up the numbers. They know there's a benefit, there's a windfall, you might say, from a tax perspective. But I'm telling you, having conversations with back home with those folks, they don't care. They're fine. It's more important to them. Their quality of life is more important than that tax revenue to a lot of those folks.
Their quality of life is more important to them. I think that is critical that everyone here in Crawford County really think about this issue and think about, you know, Carrie, if it was you or Nikhila, you know, what is your quality of life worth? Because that's a decision that Crawford County is facing right now. So what can you do? Lynn talked about this a lot. Get a yard sign and put one out if you feel strongly about this. One of the easiest things you can do to draw awareness, we've got some in the back corner there. If you're on Facebook, Crawford Anti-Wind has a Facebook page. Really kind of blew up overnight after an informational meeting that we had in January. So if you're on Facebook and you're not on there yet, do that. Sign the petition that Lynn mentioned back in this corner of the room if you haven't done that already. Attend your, meetings, county commissioner, township trustee. Consider writing a letter to the editor. Again, please be respectful and be kind. Apex has come into this community. Whether this project gets built or not, Apex is probably going to leave this community pretty quick. They have a habit of selling a project as soon as it's operational, sometimes even a little bit before. So they're probably going to be gone. We are still going to be each other's friends, family, and neighbors. So be kind. And again, come back next week, same place here, Thursday, 1 o'clock. And again, if you would want to sign up to speak at that meeting, we've got those sign-up sheets in the back of the room also. That's everything I've got. So thank you all for your patience sticking around tonight.